Welcome to the Unshielded podcast, where we explore the importance of rational privacy through the application of data protection and zero-knowledge technology. Welcome to the Unshielded podcast. We are live in London at the Midnight Summit. I'm joined by Alex McFarlane of Keyring. We're excited to talk with him in regards to what he's working on, what his experience has kind of brought him to this event here today, how privacy matters to what he's been working on, and the Keyring organization. So we're excited to have them as part of the Midnight ecosystem, and welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, for people that may not know who you are, let's get your origin story and the story behind how Keyring started, if you can share with the group.
Yeah, sure. So effectively, my background's quant. So I was doing risk quant at Nomura. We were building out. It's a funny thing, actually. The first day I got to Nomura, my boss, a great guy called Mark, dumped the entire 300 and something pages of the FRTB Basel handbook, was like, that's your job. And I remember looking, I was thinking, what the hell? I've just got here. How am I supposed to figure this out? But it's interesting, that kind of experience drives how you think about risk in crypto. So I then went and did quantitative investment strategies for a couple of years there in the same firm, and then cross-asset quant trading, mainly focused on interest rates. And so that's kind of where Keyring came out of that, because Nomura then created Laser Digital, which is like this kind of, I think it's one of the first proper moves of any bank into crypto. They got a VARA license recently and various other cool things. And then that kind of, at the same time with Keyring, was kind of created out of the back of that noise that was happening in the firm at the time. I ended up selling trading signals to some friends that I'd met playing poker, as you do in this kind of industry. And that was quite successful and got me kind of more into crypto per se. But where does Keyring come into that is when the teams at Laser were saying, okay, well, how can we do some of this stuff internally? The big thing was that basically CeFi arbitrage trading, like on Binance and OKX, looked great in 2020 and 2021, but how are you going to compete with Jane and Tower and Hudson River Trading? These guys have incredibly strong quant systems off chain. The moment they bring them on into the crypto ecosystem, you haven't got a competitive edge, right? And I felt the competitive edge is always in quant trading is basically having alternative data sets, which is what DeFi is. DeFi has a very high hurdle to entry, and it's got a lot of very interesting products in there. And I think it's where the future is in crypto. But the biggest issue for traditional finance entities is how do they get comfortable with that? And that's where Keyring came about, because the governance risk and the smart contract risk were just so insane for any entity to actually get involved with. And so we basically formed Keyring to kind of solve those problems. And that's kind of how this all came out. It's kind of like a weird, windy story of going from quant trading into frankly, identity.
Yeah, I think again, the appetite is always going to be there for traditional financial institutions to explore where there's opportunity economically. However, how does that outweigh the risk of potentially exploring that? What innovations need to be made? So I think you mentioned a few of those. I think specifically with Keyring, you built it in regards to having more zero knowledge technology. Obviously, that's where Midnight has played as well. What are some of your experiences that you've seen, both from a corporate and in quant perspective, that traditional financial institutions are more risk averse to, like you said, that now where privacy tech, zero knowledge tech is coming into play, that you feel like maybe this is a moment where they could start to explore that a little bit more?
So I think the privacy tech, I think the privacy element is a required element, but it's not where a lot of people focus on day one. And I think this is something that's really important. And I think a lot of people have got this wrong in the design of a lot of blockchains, because when you actually look at, if you give people the option, you say, okay, you can make 10,000 APY, or you can remain private. They're 100%, everyone's going to be like, give me the money, show me the dollars. So that's where basically the conflicting aims have come, because when you look at the actual effort to bring a privacy protocol, as you've probably seen from the Midnight side, it's really hard. These things, Zcash was, I think, the first one to ever come up with like zero knowledge on the blockchain format. Still to this day, I think most of their stuff is still used because of the kind of the difficulty and kind of innovation in zero knowledge is wildly complicated. So when it comes to the actual kind of like your question about like where do they see the main risks, frankly, the main risks are actually just a lot more mundane, and it's almost like the smart contract risk itself is the fact that if you get hacked, you lose your entire assets in or everything that you've got for your LPs. How are you supposed to explain that to your fund LPs as a hedge fund? And also from the retail perspective, the only other industry that has this kind of one-day drawdown to zero kind of exposure is realistically insurance, where that's the only kind of industry where you get this kind of like continual accrual, and you call that it's like a heavy-tailed relationship. It's like you'll collect pennies in front of a bulldozer and then you get squished. But that kind of like picking pennies up in front of a bulldozer kind of trade is in TradFi is extremely highly regulated. Insurance, you can't get into insurance and just create an insurance fund easily at all. It's like one of the most regulated industries you can get into because generally people don't understand that there's a bulldozer behind them when they're picking up the dollar notes. And that's one of the difficulties, I think, one of the main difficulties in most of this industry at the moment is that part. But privacy also is kind of related to that because you also do implicitly have privacy, this kind of like one-day drawdown if you get hacked. You lose all the PII for everybody. There's, I think, Fractal, for example. I mean, they had they're a great team, had a fantastic product, but they just got done on a little small thing. But that little small thing was 20 million people's data, and so that's obviously a big problem, right? And then that's like a business level drawdown to zero, right? And that's where privacy tech suddenly becomes extremely useful.
So if the privacy considerations are maybe not the primary considerations for traditional financial institutions, what are the conversations that you're having with some of your clients right now in regards to what Keyring can offer and where privacy fits as the value add? So think of me like you're pitching to a Fortune 10. They're ready to explore a blockchain. They're ready to potentially work with you and understand where privacy fits into that layer. What's the proof point that you're giving to them? Why now is a great time to do that?
I think the main thing for them is, I would say, selective disclosure, or what was it? I was trying to remember, what was it?
Rational privacy. Yeah. Common sense privacy to apply. Yeah.
Basically, one of the key things is it rational to give your KYB to 10 different entities? The crazy thing is the guy who's, the previous director general of MI5, right? Yeah. I brought him up as well earlier today in a previous mention name drop. I found it absolutely crazy that he was saying on stage that he had to send his own PII information across the internet to random websites. I don't know if it was random websites. I think it might have been bank accounts, but just the fact that the Director General of MI5 has to KYC himself on and send his data, right? That is mental. That's absolutely insane. He's probably one of the most high profile targets in the world, maybe second or third up there in terms of the priority of who you'd want to hack into. And yet he's just sending his information like to these fairly flimsy websites that get done all the time on this kind of risk. That's how insane is that? That's not rational. Yeah, that's absolutely batshit crazy.
He's probably the one that best understands the level of security risk.
He said it's insane. He said he was saying on stage that he thinks it's insane as well. It's not rational. And so we slipped into this sort of, in the last 20 years, we've done this kind of like slow, slippery slope of, imagine if you said 20 years ago to your parents, to open your new bank account, you've just got to send your passport, a photo of your passport. Firstly, a photo of your passport, they'd be like, no. They would just say no. And then you say, okay, well, you've also got to send it to this random startup. But that startup's not my bank. But no, they're working for the bank. Well, what's their relationship to the bank? This is what my mum says all the time. She's like, why would I send it to XYZ company? They're not the bank. I'm like, yeah, but they're working for the bank. Okay, well, who sees it behind them? I don't know. Maybe the bank, and maybe they're contractors. Who are the contractors? And so I think this is the difference where in the last 20 years, we've just been like, whatever, we can do it on the phone. I can do a selfie and roll my face around. It's incrementally easier, but each of those incrementally easier steps that we're doing just for the sake of going to market or Silicon Valley product market fit, we're basically undermining our own kind of values and ability to operate as normal individuals. And that's not rational.
Yeah, it's an innovation of convenience. It's an innovation of ease, not necessarily innovation of security, of power, of sovereignty, empowering the user to be more dynamic on the internet. It has been a lot of innovation to sort of put an easy button on their experience. So yeah, I absolutely understand that. And I think that's key. Yeah, I'd like to actually kind of bring back, you mentioned kind of your quant experience. I also saw that you did your dissertation on deep machine learning.
Oh,
So,
no way.
yeah, so
You actually saw that.
yeah, so I'm fascinated. Like, obviously you're into mathematics, programming. If you think about like what are some of the innovations that are happening in our space, whether or maybe not in our space, but adjacent, what are some of the innovations that you feel like you like to keep an eye on, see what's happening, and how that might maybe be privacy might be a consideration in those realms, whether maybe it's an AI, like deep machine learning that you talked about, maybe in your education.
Well, the deep machine learning stuff was actually a coincidence because I was studying like quantum field theories at the time, and there's like a lot of the early stuff. So that algorithm in particular, or Hamiltonian or hybrid Monte Carlo as it's known as, was a big breakthrough in quantum current dynamics simulations, which is like the constituents of like protons and neutrons in an atom, right? They do these complicated simulations, and they have like, the reason it's interesting in machine learning and crossover from physics is that you have these like infinite dimensional, well, really, really high dimensional spaces, and you have the same in a neural network. And so they basically realized, I can't remember who it was, I don't know if it was Charles Hinton or someone, but someone took that and realized, holy crap, you can use that to solve the same high dimensional problem in a neural net and solve that probability distribution. And then suddenly there's a huge propagation of physics into deep machine learning. So yeah, I'm not just randomly going around just doing like random deep learning and stuff, although that actually got me into it. But it's a good question. Like, how does that shape stuff? I think particularly, well, firstly, that helps you think about problem solving in quant finance. Mainly because you just get given like a ridiculous number of tough problems to solve when you're doing physics.
And what seems like probably amount of data to manage as well. So,
yeah. So I think it's a lot of the mentality there. The resilience, I think, is you get a lot from these kind of programs. More, I'd say, draws on the quant finance side is how can you think about pricing the risk? And how can you think about evaluating the risk of stuff that like activities you're doing in DeFi. Like a really simple example is if you look on DeFi borrowing lending apps like Aave or Morpho, Euler, Gearbox, whatever, and you look at the interest rate curve, you may have seen it, these linear kinks, as they call them. You have like a line of the utilization. If loads of people are lending, then you further down the line, if loads of people are borrowing and there's not that many lenders, you get high utilization, and then it goes up and then kicks off to a really high interest rate, and the interest rate is driven by what the supply demand curve is. Now, one of the biggest interest points of that is, okay, well, how do you set that? And this is kind of the questions that you come up with when you think about it from like a quant or physics perspective. You think about, okay, well, why would you do that? Like, okay, someone came up with a linear, so, well, you start at the basic of, okay, so you put your king point at 95% with a 7% interest rate. Why did you do that? And everyone's like, oh, well, it looked about right. And now I'm a big believer in that. I think the crowdsourced logic is always usually correct. I think that sounds maybe a bit like controversial, but I would also say, in generally, people don't do stupid stuff.
Right. It's not necessarily herd or unrational. It is, there is a reason why they would gravitate towards that, so to speak.
Yeah. If you go in a crowd of like 1 million people crowd, right?
Right.
And then let's say you've got to find the shortest path between 4 fields. And then there's 1 million people there. They're all kind of like, they're just going through the pathway.
Right.
And then one dude, like this happens with sheep all the time, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Maybe it's sheep. But let's say that's a crowd of sheep.
No.
And one sheep is just like randomly decides that he's just like, oh, screw this. I'm going to go through this fence. And then the other sheep just looks at him and then goes, it's a good idea. It's like a good fence. And before you know it, you got 1 million sheep in the wrong field. And so, or the right field, but who found a shortcut between the two fields. And I think this is where it's really interesting when you think about groupthink. You see it in prisons all the time. How many prisoners do you think go in and realize that they can cook meth in their bedroom? There's very few probably realize that. There's very few that can figure that out, like on the chemistry side. All it takes is one dude to figure out like, this is how I can smuggle in whatever. I don't know how you do meth in a prison cell, but do you know what I mean? It's like the incremental knowledge that is accrued over like a mass group of people. And the people aren't stupid. They realize if that guy's got something good, I want that too. And then the next person will do it, and the next person will do it. So I see this, the most interesting thing I think about with that is like lottery playing. Lots of like statisticians will say playing the lottery is a shit idea. I don't believe it is a shit idea because otherwise why would everybody do it? That's something to think about.
Fair. Yeah, absolutely. And so as those innovations come into play, where do you feel like privacy has the largest consideration? Is it in we talked about like convenience. It doesn't need to be seamlessly integrated into convenience since that has been the driver of innovation, or do you feel like as long as the technology gets there, and it's a little bit where we are with blockchain, technology has gotten to the point where transparency is more of an issue to be solved for. It is the compromise we made to get to a better decentralized technology, but now privacy is a potential solution to that. So do you see that, privacy has to follow into innovation, or can privacy leave into that innovation?
I think everyone hates transparency. I think I'm just going to throw that out there. Transparency is actually shit. What they actually care about is trust. I think transparency and trust get confused. No one wants transparency. Everyone wants trust or trustlessness. People want like verify, not trust. But you don't, the dumb way of doing that is fully transparent. That's like the basic way of doing it, because you basically say, okay, well, everything's in the open. But most people don't want that. And so when coming back to your point of, does it need to be a thing of convenience, the privacy side? Absolutely. The guy from Brave, I forget his name.
Brandon Ike, yeah.
Yeah, he's also my frenemy in terms of, I don't know him personally, but he's my frenemy because he created JavaScript, which incidentally he said the other day was actually his evil child.
Yeah.
He's single-handedly responsible for most bad code on the internet.
Exactly. All the ad tech that we have out there that's following you around, the cookies, that's his, yeah.
The JavaScript, the massive JavaScript code base that you see with no documentation, and all sorts of duck type variables.
Right.
But yeah, he made a really good point. He was basically saying that in general, what people do is they just they're very short-termist, and a lot of the good stuff like privacy doesn't take off unless it just happens to be there. And he was saying that's what we've done with Brave. They basically created privacy by default. They've done all the cool stuff in the background, but then they've also created a good UX. So I think when you're looking at the growth of Midnight, you can't just say privacy, that's the UX. That's shit UX, because basically it doesn't do anything. It's a USP, but on top of that, you need a really killer UX. So when you're creating Midnight, the one thing I would look for is you need something better than MetaMask experience. Otherwise, why would anybody use it? You need mobile app integration. You need to be able to prove the stuff off mobile, because people need to be able to do it when they're sitting on the toilet, because that's where most internet happens these days, right? I mean, how many times you got on Instagram when you weren't sitting in bed or on the toilet? Then it's really important that kind of core UX element that is nothing to do with privacy is better than what is existing and already out there. And then the DApp ecosystem. I think this is where, I haven't got the logos. I thought you got the logos all here, but that's one thing I think with the Midnight ecosystem is doing that's really interesting, is that you're able to drag a lot of people into it. And it's a really smart move on the dev side where they've involved, maybe you could argue, I'm sure that on the dev side, there will be some dev in the Midnight team that goes, we've got this person's code is a bit shit. But that's not the point. The point is that you're doing a political move by creating a code base which has a shitload of interactions with other people. And that I think is really, really interesting, because it's not really who has the best tech doesn't win. USB versus whatever the hell the other one was. Exactly.
Yeah.
What is the other one? No one knows. Blockbuster versus VHS.
You're right.
You need to create that kind of ecosystem. And that's what I think is really interesting about the Midnight growth, because the ecosystem is part of the UX, right?
Yep.
And that's how you get a good UX. You get a good UX because you've got plug and play in lots of different ecosystems.
Yeah, ecosystem partners that are building, they're looking for solutions. You have independent developers that are looking and catering to what the best experience might be for that network. So absolutely. Thank you for kind of bringing that round circle here into what you're looking forward to for Midnight. For the Unshielded podcast, we always like to end with a little reckless speculation. So is there anything you could see, this year was people have coined as 2025, the year of the stable coin, what is maybe some of the innovations you see that are on the trending upward that you are looking to say, 2026, I see this happening?
2026 is going to be the year where Keyring goes mental. No, I would say that. Yeah, obviously. No, I think if we're going to go none kind of other speculation, I think fixed income is what's going to come. Okay. It's already coming already. We did a big kind of look in the past at where TradFi developed, and we realized that currently we're at the proximate point of the 1970s in terms of evolution. And what's really interesting is all the crypto stuff has followed exactly the TradFi path.
Interesting.
in terms of each individual primitive that comes, like insurance, like in terms of credit, in terms of like Eurodollar. We're at the point of Eurodollars moving into like swap markets.
Okay.
More explicitly, we've just done treasury stripping, which is Pendle.
Okay.
So we're coming into the next bit, which is what happened in TradFi after treasury stripping, which is swap markets became really big. Cross-currency carry, stuff like that.
Okay.
And I think that's where we're going to see the crypto market move in 2026. It's going to be fixed income. It's going to dominate everywhere.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing your background too. Great experience. Thanks for coming to the Midnight Summit, participating. I know you had a panel that you were participating on, so thank you for that. But again, wonderful to have Alex McFarlane, CEO of Keyring, here on the Unshielded podcast. And thank you for being part of the Midnight ecosystem.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cool.
If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media for more insights on blockchain, decentralized finance, and the technologies shaping the future of Web3.